From its purpose to its creatures to its impressive stats, join us as we explore the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro. Ten, its meaning is up for debate. Let's think about statues and monuments in the grander sense for a bit, okay? Every single time one of them is made, they're made for a purpose, correct? For example, the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. is meant to be a symbol of President Abraham Lincoln and the freedom he brought to so many people during his run as president. That's a very clear meaning, and rightfully so, I might add. But for the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, the meaning is technically a bit up for debate, because how a lot of people see it is very different from how other people see it. Not sure? You might just look at it and go, it's meant to be a representation of Jesus Christ of the Christian faith. And that's true to an extent, but what is built is not always the meaning. For some people, they look at the statue and see Christ's position and feel that it's a depiction of sorts of him on the cross on which he died, signaling that this is a statue that honors the death of Christ, which gave all people life after death via resurrection into heaven, making it a very holy meaning to the statue. But to others, they look at Christ's arms not as a position on the legendary cross, but as a symbol of open arms. Jesus said to love God and love people, to love thy neighbor as thyself, and to give to those in need. So to many people in Rio de Janeiro, they see it as a sign that they need to be good to those next to them and those who come into their country. That statue is really important for us in Rio and for the people in Brazil. It has a lot of things behind it. Not just the religious symbol, but the welcoming symbol of open arms. It's also supposed to mean we are good hosts, one local Brazilian said. To be clear, there is no right or wrong answer to the meaning of the statue. Rather, this is just how ambiguous the statue is in terms of its construction and position, which is fine. Art is meant to be open to interpretation, and statues are definitely art. Number 9, it was built to fight godlessness. Okay, so we've delved a lot into what the statue might actually mean in terms of its position and such. But let's ask a more basic question. Why was it built at all? You might think this is an odd question given that the statue is Christ the Redeemer and likely was built to show off the Brazilian faith, right? Well, that might have been a reason for other countries, but for Brazil in 1920, it was a little more complicated than that. You see, this all really started back in 1889, when the Brazilian Republic was officially born. As part of this new republic, they separated church from state, something many other countries have done over the years. But to those who practiced the Catholic faith, which was the dominant religion in Brazil, they feared that this separation would cause them to deter from the path of faith and the path of God. Their fears grew over the years, especially when World War I happened. At that point in time, they saw an increase in godlessness, and thus decided that they needed a statue to remind them of their God and who was watching over them, and on and on. Thus, in 1920, they hired Heitor da Silva Costa to design and make the statue that would tower over the city and be a daily reminder of Christ. You could argue that this was a bit petty of the Catholic Church to build a statue as a daily reminder, but you need to remember that they weren't doing it for vain reasons. They were just trying to make sure that everyone remembered that there is a better path, one that doesn't involve dark ways, and the statue was made as a reminder of that. And it worked, to be clear, and now Christ the Redeemer is one of the most beloved statues in all the world, though it almost didn't start out that way. 8. Christ with a ball. Whether we realize it or not, statue makers go through a long process of trying to make sure that their upcoming statues look the right way, are made the right way, and convey the right message. Heitor da Silva Costa was no different, and not unlike many other legendary statues, the Christ the Redeemer statue once had a very different design plan. What was it going to look like? Well, most of it was the same. It was a standing Christ, he was looking out over the city and even facing the sun. The biggest changes, though, were in the arms, specifically what he had in his arms. Right now, his arms are empty, but in the original design he had something in each hand. One hand would have him with a cross, and the other would have a globe in it. The cross obviously representing how Christ had to carry the cross to his execution by hanging on it. And the globe is much like the children's song in how he has the whole world in his hands, thus giving a very clear meaning to the statue. Initially, the men in charge of the project were very content with this design. However, as they started to share it around, it got a nickname, Christ with a Ball, because from afar, that's what it would look like, as the marks of the various things on the globe wouldn't appear on it from a distance, which is what most people in Rio would see the statue at. So, Heitor da Silva Costa consulted another Brazilian artist, and the arms open wide Christ the Redeemer statue was rendered and then made. Number 7. It has been damaged by lightning. I want you to think about the Christ the Redeemer for a sec. Think about how high up in the air it is in regards to Rio de Janeiro. If you don't know, it's nearly a half-mile up via a mountain that is within the city. That elevation was again done to ensure that the people could see the Christ the Redeemer statue just about everywhere they went. But as you hopefully know, the higher up into the air you go, the more problems nature has to throw at you. In this case, the problem is lightning. While Christ the Redeemer isn't made of metal, it still basically is a lightning rod because it sticks out like a sore thumb and it can attract lightning in its own way, which is why it shouldn't be too surprising that in its basically 100-year lifespan that it has been struck by lightning multiple times. One of the worst times by far, though, was in 2008. A massive electrical storm hit Rio de Janeiro, and the lightning not only hit the statue, it damaged its face and hands. Thankfully, the people were able to restore the statue to its former glory, even using the exact same material from the exact same quarry where the original building materials were taken from. More than likely, though, this kind of event will continue to happen given its height and Brazil's weather patterns. 6. It took nearly a decade to make. Construction projects in the modern age is nothing compared to the projects that have been done over time. Even in the 1920s, with all the advances they had made, they were still doing a lot of things by hand. Major construction vehicles hadn't been truly built yet, and even if they had, not everyone in the world had them. So to make the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, it took a lot of time and effort, because recall, it was built on top of a mountain. But the real problem for the making of the Christ the Redeemer wasn't resources, it was distance and time. Heitor da Silva Costa may have been the designer of the statue, but he had to go to France to find a sculptor to make it real. He would find Paul Landowski, and over the course of 9 years, Landowski would take the design, make his own version of the parts that would help him make the statue, including some improvements and design, and then he shipped them to Brazil. Done? Not quite. He made the pieces out of the materials he had in France. Once they were in Brazil, they were remade into pieces of reinforced concrete so that it would withstand the weather and other issues. So yeah, by the time the statue was all done, it had been nearly a decade since it had truly begun. Number 5. It may start looking different in 2020. As we just noted, much of the statue is made with reinforced concrete. It's strong, reliable, and as we also noted, can be easy to fix. However, what you see in regards to the statue isn't concrete. It's actually a material known as soapstone. Why is it coated in that? Well, not unlike things like the Statue of Liberty, which is actually made of copper but has a patina that makes it green, they wanted the statue to feel lighter and more visible and more visually pleasing, so the soapstone was used. Here's the problem. While they've been maintaining the Christ the Redeemer for almost 100 years and using the soapstone as a result of that, the soapstone from the quarry they've been using has officially run out of material, meaning that they can't make it the same color that they have been doing for the time of its life so far. That's not to say it won't be coated in another material. It's just not going to be the same soapstone that made it the color it is now. The next major renovation for the Christ the Redeemer statue is scheduled for 2020, and when that happens, the statue will likely look much darker than before. 4. Restoration has been done naturally and for visitors. As we've stated previously, the Christ the Redeemer statue has been worked on over the years since its official finishing in 1931. There has been damages to be fixed, visuals to be reapplied, and so on and so forth. But what might surprise you is that much of the restorations have been done in the last 40 years. Because the first major restoration of the Christ the Redeemer statue happened in 1980. What happened in 1980, you ask? That would be the arrival of Pope John Paul II. He was visiting Brazil, and so naturally the Catholic Church of the region decided to make sure that the statue was in pristine condition for him when he arrived. Since then, the statue has gone under many restorations and will have one in 2020 as noted. But you could argue that aside from the lightning damage one, none were more important than the one done for the Pope. Number 3. Going up? For the longest time, the only way to get to the Christ the Redeemer statue was to walk up the side of the mountain via 200 steps, which can be good for your exercise habits, but not exactly fun if you're not really in shape. But you had to do it in order to get to the statue. However, in 2003, people eventually realized that this wasn't the best idea, so they actually installed an escalator that can help get you to the statue quicker and without much work on your part. But be warned, those escalators can break, and that means you're going to be walking again. 2. Graffiti is a national crime. Sadly, the idea of spray painting or graffitiing a work of art is a very popular pastime for troublemakers and vandals. And in 2010, some such vandals decided that they were going to go up and mark up the Christ the Redeemer statue while it was going under a renovation. Here's the problem with that. It had honestly never happened before, so there wasn't an official response. Until they did it, and the mayor of Rio declared it a crime against the nation. So if anyone is dumb enough to follow their example, they can officially call themselves enemies of the state. Number 1. There's a chapel at the base of the statue. Without a doubt, the Christ the Redeemer statue is one of the most visited places in Rio de Janeiro, and for good reason. But some people have wanted to see it grow in its abilities, if you will, outside of it being a tourist attraction. And that's why in 2006, which was its official 75th birthday anniversary, they decided to make a small chapel at the base of the statue, one where you could truly get married there and have a small reception as well. You might think, why would people want to do that? Well, you have to remember that this isn't just a statue, it's a monument to Christ, and many people do weddings in churches and places like that to receive the blessing of God. And what better way to receive that blessing than in a place under a giant statue of Christ? Now, there are some drawbacks to this place. Because of location, the chapel is very small, and so you can't have a massive wedding there. Plus, since you have to walk up to the statue, that means you're walking up to it in your wedding gown and suit. So, if you think your potential wife or husband would love doing their wedding there, make sure they're ready for a hike. Granted, there is an escalator, but it's not the same. Thanks for watching, everyone! What did you think of these facts and history of the Christ the Redeemer statue that stands on top of Rio de Janeiro? Did you learn a lot of new things that you didn't know about it before? Are you surprised that it has this deep of a history? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the channel.